This is my Lego Cube collection, which are some of my favorite puzzles I've ever made. The basic idea is that you start with a normal Rubik's Cube, but then glue these Lego plates on to replace the stickers, giving you this really fun look in the end. It's also functional too, because if you get the sizing just right, you can also take some larger Lego plates and stick them on top like this to bandage the puzzle and actually make it more difficult to solve. But after making these things from a 1x1 all the way up to a 4x4, I ran into a problem, which is you can't really make a Lego cube any bigger than this. The reason for that is just the sheer size of these 2x2 plates. Even if you take the biggest 5x5 in my collection, as you can see, the pieces are nowhere near big enough to fit an entire plate onto it. Theoretically, you could modify a normal 5x5 by expanding it to be big enough to fit these 2x2 plates on, but the resulting puzzle would be absolutely massive, and that would just be a ton of work for something not all that practical. Instead, I think we're actually better off starting over from scratch and rethinking our use of these 2x2 plates. Clearly, if we want to go any bigger than a 4x4, we're going to need to start with some smaller Lego bricks. And that's where the 1x1 plate comes in. Now, I've actually used these plates before to make a Lego cube, namely the massive 9x9, but if we want to miniaturize our entire Lego cube collection, we're going to have to start with something a little bit smaller, like the 1x1. Hopefully this will end up being the easiest of the mini Lego cubes to make, and we should be able to follow more or less the same process that we did for the original. As you can see, all I really did was take the 6 different colored Lego plates, sand them down to match the look of the other cubes, and then glue them on to a black core. I believe last time I just made the core out of some random black Lego pieces, whereas this time I decided to use 3D printing to make my life a little bit easier and make my own custom one. And here's the result. As you can see, it's kind of like its own Lego brick, but with studs on all 6 sides, but its only purpose is just to fit these 6 Lego plates around it. So now that we've got that printed, making our very first mini Lego cube should be as easy as just taking our 6 Lego plates, sanding them down to round off the corners, and then gluing them onto the core. Let's try it. Ta-da! I ended up making a little bit of a mess with some super glue on my fingers, but I think I got most of it off of the actual puzzle, and I would say it's looking pretty good. Our original Lego 1x1 now has a new baby friend, and all it really took was 6 Lego pieces and less than 30 minutes of work. So now, let's move on to our next mini Lego cube. Something a little bit more complicated, the 2x2. Now this larger one was already a bit of a pain to make because it's kind of hard to get your hands on a 2x2 this size. Just for comparison, here's what a normal size 2x2 looks like. And so you can imagine this doesn't bode well for us today, where we literally need every single piece to be the size of this little 1x1 plate. Fortunately though, if we can't find any 2x2 small enough, we can instead use the fact that every 2x2 on the inside is really just a 3x3 with the edges and centerpieces hidden. And fortunately, unlike 2x2s, there is no shortage of really tiny mass-produced 3x3s out there on the market. This right here is the 1 cube, and at just 1 centimeter across, it should be more than small enough for us. As you can see, we can easily fit 4 Lego pieces on top of here. Of course, you can see it's actually a little bit too small, but that's perfect for us because we're gonna have to extend it out anyway to turn it into a 2x2. The process is actually easier than you might think. Basically, we just have to make all 8 of the corners a lot bigger, so that's all that you can see from the outside of the puzzle. And then we just have to glue together a few of the pieces. So basically glue these edges and centers together. And just by doing those 2 things, we'll turn it from a 3x3 into a 2x2. So how do we extend the pieces outwards? Well, I once again turned to 3D printing, modifying the design I made for the 1x1 so that each piece fits just 3 Lego plates on it instead of all 6 from before. And here's the resulting pieces. Let me pop one of these off and clean it up for you to show you how they work. And here it is. So as you can see on the outside, we now have 3 studs to fit the 3 plates needed for each corner piece of the cube. So it fits on just like that. And then on the inside, we have this little cubic mechanism that should be exactly the right size and should allow it to function without the inner layers interfering at all. So that's the theory at least. In practice, I've never actually tried a modification like this on a cube so small, so we'll have to see how it works out. But we've got the cube, we've got all 8 of our extensions, we've got our 24 Lego plates that we'll need, sandpaper, super glue, so let's give it a shot. And here's the finished mod. Check it out. I love how this thing turned out. It looks awesome, and it's also absolutely tiny. Here it is compared to the original Lego 2x2, so it's just a little tiny version of it. Here it is compared to the original Lego 1x1, it's actually the exact same size. Here's what it looks like compared to a normal size 2x2. I think even with the relatively massive Lego plates glued on top, this has got to be the smallest fully functional 2x2 I have ever seen. It really is just tiny. And speaking of fully functional, it seems like my plan of turning a mini 3x3 into a 2x2 turned out surprisingly well. This thing is not only functional, but it actually has pretty good turning. I guess that's just a testament to Cube Lab, who made the original puzzle, but yeah, it almost seems to turn better in 2x2 form, just because it's a little bit bigger, so you have more leverage on the internal puzzle. As I do a quick solve here, I will say that the build process went pretty smoothly. The one issue I had is, as I was doing the final assembly, I must have let a little bit of super glue seep into the internal 3x3, because as I started turning it, 90% of the turns worked perfectly fine, but every once in a while, I just got to a side that would not turn at all. Basically, I just had to pry at the cube until I got the internal puzzle to pop, and then luckily I was able to separate that glue and then reassemble it again without anything breaking, and now it works perfectly again. Now, of course, the whole point of going through all the trouble to make sure the cube is exactly the right size is so that the final studs will be spaced out the perfect amount, so that this cube will actually be bandageable and you can stick little pieces over top. 2x2 bandage mods are not really a thing because it's kind of hard to make one that's not just an easier version of a 2x2, but I think I might have come up with one just like this. So let's go ahead and scramble it up. I think it will still definitely be easier to solve than a normal 2x2, but at least it should be a little bit different. So here we go. That's about the best that we can do. I've thought about it a little bit, and I think the trick to this one is just to solve these two pieces relative to each other, and then do a single setup move, and then stare at these last four pieces and figure out what last layer case this would be. So I figured out that these two pieces need to go over here with yellow facing up, whereas these two pieces need to go over here with blue facing up, which means that our last layer case is just the one right here with headlights on both sides. And luckily, there is a nice little easy algorithm that goes like this that lets you solve that. And then we can just do one final move and then undo our setup move, and the cube is solved. I've tried solving it a few times, and I think you do end up with that same exact last layer case every single time. So if you guys can think of a better 2x2 bandage mod, definitely let me know and I'll try it out. So once again, I'm very happy with how this thing turned out, especially for being probably the smallest Rubik's Cube mod I've ever worked on, and a very good start to this new series of mini Lego cubes. All right, on to the next puzzle. It's time for a mini remake of the classic Lego cube, the 3x3. This one could very well be the easiest to convert to these 1x1 plates. After all, we have so many different sizes of 3x3s that surely one of them has to fit perfectly, right? Well, unfortunately, it does not seem so. The closest I've been able to find is this Rubik's brand, quote unquote, world's smallest Rubik's cube, which is obviously just a blatant lie. But as you can see, if we go ahead and start stacking Lego bricks on top of it, it is pretty close to the width of 3 plates. Essentially, we're just gonna have to make each side of the cube about 1 or 2 millimeters bigger. And once again, we're gonna use the power of 3D printing to print out a little extension for every single piece so that everything should fit on perfectly. Here are the finished pieces, and as you can see, there's 3 different types. There's the centers with just 1 stud, the edges with 2 studs, and the corners with all 3 studs. Here's what each one looks like by itself. So basically for these center pieces, we just glue these right on top of here, and then we can just snap a brick right on top of that. The edges are the same thing, except we can now snap 2 different colored bricks on, and they glue onto the edge pieces, just like that. And then the corner pieces have 3 different colors, and they can glue onto the corners, and everything should fit together perfectly. Sort of. If you really think about the cube geometry here, you might be realizing that these center and edge pieces are actually too big for the cube to function. That's because when you start turning these sides halfway, like this and this, the Lego piece is not physically small enough to fit in between those 2 layers. Luckily, this shouldn't require any extensive modification because it is so dang close to fitting, but at a minimum, we will have to sand down this part of every single corner on the cube just to make sure that there's no interference there. So that'll definitely make this a more difficult modding process than the 2x2 was, not to mention the fact that we have triple the number of pieces and a whole ton of these Legos to glue on. But I'm feeling pretty confident I can make it work, and we've got everything we need here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the time lapse. And here is the mini Lego 3x3. What a cool puzzle. Here it is compared to the original one at just half the size, and honestly, I think this one looks even better. Once again, this is an absolutely tiny puzzle in your hands. Here it is compared to a normal size 2x2 and a normal size 3x3, so it is just little. The plan worked out really well with the 3D printed extensions. It looks really good with the exception of a few ugly looking gaps on this axis, just due to some 3D printing wonkiness. But other than that, it looks like a super professional little puzzle. And the turning is not bad either. I mean, honestly, the turning of the original puzzle wasn't great, but adding on the Legos didn't really change much, and it still turns pretty good. There's a little bit of new catchiness because, again, the Legos are never all going to be perfectly aligned, but it really is never bad, and it's just as stable and easy to turn as the original puzzle was. It is fully bandageable, and being a 3x3, that means we can do some much crazier things than we could on the 2x2. So let's say we don't want this center and edge to move apart from each other, and we can even do something crazy and maybe bandage together all 4 of these pieces. Let's add on some on the edges just to reinforce that a little bit. Now, will this thing be very difficult to solve? I don't know, probably, but you can always just keep on bandaging more and more pieces until you get something crazy like the Meffert's Bandage Cube, which is literally near impossible to solve. I have never even solved it before. This one, as it turns out though, was not that hard. I figured out how to solve it in about 5 minutes using the beginner's method and just this one setup move here. But just like the original Lego Cube, there are endless possibilities, and I think I've just proven to myself that the turning quality is not too bad either. So now, where do we go from here? We've successfully miniaturized most of our original Lego Cube collection with this mini 3x3, mini 2x2, and mini 1x1. So clearly the obvious next step is the final 2x2 plate Lego cube that I've made, the 4x4, right? Well, as much as I would love to make a mini Lego 4x4, especially since this thing is massive and turns awful, there just aren't any 4x4s on the market that are small enough to make one out of. The smallest 4x4 I've come across, you can't even buy it anymore, but it came in at 40 millimeters, whereas to make a Lego cube, you need one that's exactly 32 millimeters. And unfortunately, the same thing is true for a 5x5. The smallest one I've seen is 57 millimeters, whereas you need to get all the way down to 40 millimeters to make a Lego cube. So what? I'm just gonna give up on this grand mission of mini Lego cubes that I just started? Well, no. For one thing, there are some mini 6x6s and 7x7s that do happen to be the exact right size for Lego cubes, not to mention the 9x9 that I've already made. Not sure about the 8x8 though. And somehow, there's also an 11x11 that's exactly the right size. Someone named Ogre Cubes made one of those years ago, which actually inspired me to make the 9x9, so maybe that's an option for the future. But somehow, some way, I really want to make a 1x1 all the way up through 7x7 at some point in the future, so stay tuned for that. And side note, if anyone knows of a good 4x4 or 5x5 that's exactly the right size, or knows how to design and 3D print one to be exactly that size, definitely let me know and I will get in touch. Anyway, that's pretty much it for what's hopefully the start of a brand new Lego Cube journey. I'm really happy with how these things turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching me make them. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully there'll be lots more Lego Cubes to come, and I'll see you guys next time.